decided to do a program about the Black Plagues. There were 3. And Peter said, oh, you know, anything about infectious disease would be good. I said, well, what about the Spanish influenza? And he said, Black Plague sounds better. And I thought, oh, good, I think so too. So here we go. If it seems disorganized, I'm sorry, but I eventually cover practically everything that you would hope to learn about it. And if there's any doctors in the audience and know more
Look
than
how perfect
I do,
the costume was.
please tell me. Okie doke. So the first one was actually in the 6th century. So the Byzantine Empire was at that point at its peak, and it was Justinian and Theodora who were ruling, and they were building up towards the greatness almost of like ancient Rome. And then the plague hit. So we'll have a few slides about the Justinian pandemic, and mostly I'm going to talk about the one that is in the Middle Ages, and also one that a lot of people don't know about that was in the late 19th century. Onward. So if we were worried about who's going to die from this, well, let's just go backwards for a minute. The pneumonic plague is almost 100% lethal. Your lungs fill with fluid and lots of blood. So these would be lungs that are filled, the whole bottom, 3/4 are full of fluid, and the air is where it's dark. So that was around quite a bit in all 3 of these plagues. The second to worst is the septicemic plague, where you do get sick from fleas, whereas this one, pneumonic, people are just coughing at you when you get sick. Septicemic and bubonic are pretty much spread by parasites. And with the septicemic, you can bleed into your tissues because now the organism is on the move. And there was an incredible thing I found. I didn't want to show you the picture, but someone with septicemic plague is in the hospital bed, modern, like, I don't know, a few years ago. His hands are black and gangrene. His feet look like that. The way he caught it was his cat was choking on a dead rodent, and he tried to pull the dead rodent out of the cat's mouth, and the cat bit him. And the cat had plague. Probably the rodent did too. So this is just out in Oregon somewhere. So the plague is still going around. And that poor man caught the septicemic plague, and he did eventually lose his fingers and toes. Okay, bubonic is the one that everyone seems to have heard of. It's also called the Black Death. And we'll get to how it's spread in more detail. I'm just sort of introducing the 3 types of plague right now. And many people can survive the bubonic plague. Maybe you've all heard about this CCR5 delta 32 mutation. It has to do with your immune system and whether or not the plague can actually hijack your white blood cells. If you have a certain mutation, nope. You won't even get sick. So back in the day, there were people who didn't get sick at all, even though they were exposed. There were people who got sick but then recovered. And then there were people who just died. And a lot of it seems to be pertaining to this interesting mutation, presence, absence. So I don't know why this guy looks so happy if he has a fever, but anyway, he's got the bubonic plague. And for modesty's sake, I guess they're not showing the lymph nodes in the groin, but I showed them to you last slide. So what you're seeing there is very, very swollen lymph nodes. That's the bubo. And this person would have lumps in their armpit and in their neck as well. So bubonic plague, which you might be able to recover from, is just starts out as a very typical infectious disease. And we know now, we didn't back then in medieval times, that the bacillus that causes it is called Yersinia pestis, named after the man who identified it. And we'll also get to that too. So at this point, if you just have bubonic plague, it's really only in your lymph nodes. But if you get the septicemic type of plague, those bacteria are on the move and they're going everywhere. And then with the pneumonic plague, like we said before, fluid in the airways, we'll have the bacteria. Now, there's a bunch of quotes that I want to sort of read to you. I almost feel like I could do this lecture just based on eyewitness accounts of people that saw all the dying around them, all the sickness. So here's a kind of a long quote. Avignon, the pneumonic plague. Residents were quick to recognize the uncontrollable cough of the pneumonic plague, violent, spasmodic tattoo that threw people against walls or doubled them over in the streets, left chins and shirt fronts stained with bloody mucus, and produced a rattling noise in the lungs that sounded like a heavy iron chain being dragged across cobblestones. And then you die. Boom. You fall down and then you just die.
That's pretty descriptive.
And if people would dissect you, they would find that your lungs were totally full of blood. All right, so the Justinian Black Plague. Many of you might have seen years ago an exhibit about the Silk Road at the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, and learned about all the things that traveled along, animals and plants and food and people and spices and diseases. Oh yes. So the Justinian Black Plague, it's thought that it originated in Central Asia, and then the traders brought it all along the Silk Road. And eventually landed in the Middle East. And we're thinking right now about this area in here for the Justinian plague. So that was the first carefully recorded outbreak of what was certainly the Black Plague, 1541. And it didn't go really, really far west, but it had been infecting people in the East. And so many of these things are going to remind you of the pandemic now, because here, people are aware, here comes the plague. There's been rumors and witnesses, here comes the plague. But you have to remember, people didn't understand how disease spread. They realized that if you stayed away from sick people, you probably wouldn't get sick. But of course, the germ theory of disease wasn't in the atmosphere at that point. Now, I just put this because I thought it was so interesting. I don't know if some of you have taken art history courses before and learned about Byzantine art, but Justinian and Theodora and the beautiful mosaics of what they looked like. This is obviously a manufactured image of Emperor Justinian based on the mosaic. I just loved how that looked. So I thought I would share that with you. Okay, so we're talking about Constantinople, 5,000 lives a day, and ended up killing about half the city's population. And then it spread back east. Some of it spread a little further west, and this was antiquity's worst pandemic. So about a quarter of the world's population, and cycling through for hundreds of years. And Justinian got sick from it, but he lived. So maybe he had the Delta 32 mutation, at least one allele. I thought this, I'm going to sprinkle this with lots of peculiar art because I just love it. This is people that are well, but then towards the bottom of the picture, oh, not so well. Oh, the color is fading from me. And then boom, dead. All right, so it seems that the Justinian plague did have bubonic, septicemic, and pneumonic forms. And I just thought I'd add a few more pictures of what is a really common motif, a dead woman with the baby, oh, it's so sad, trying to nurse. I saw wax dioramas of this at the Spurlock Museum in Florence. And there was a dead woman with a baby trying to nurse. even in these wax images, these 3D images. So that must have been just the most heartrending image that the artists wanted to conjure up. So there's another one. I don't remember all the different time periods and attributions, but there's a dead woman and the poor baby is trying to nurse, and this person's covering their mouth, and there's dying going on all around and people feeling really, really lousy. Yeah. There's another one. Cover my mouth. I'm near this dead woman. The baby's trying to nurse. Really powerful images. Okay, so the Justinian plague, some people say it came out of Egypt, maybe not along the Silk Road. There were ships that were coming into the Mediterranean from Egypt with grain. And I think you know, whenever there's grain ships or grain silos or grain fields, there's going to be a lot of black rats. So the black rats made their way to Constantinople and then through, boats and carts. And this was such a shame because this was right when the Byzantine Empire had rebuilt after the fall of Rome. And they were really, it seemed, on a trajectory to establish a lot of that golden era. Didn't happen. Naturally, there were famines right after. So whenever there's anything like this, it causes such a demographic collapse. It's a game changer for many, many different reasons. Okay, so here's another quote for you. Villages whose inhabitants perished altogether. A scene of destruction at Constantinople, noble and chaste women, dignified with honor, who sat in bedchambers now with their mouths swollen, wide open and gasping, who were piled up in horrible heaps, all ages lying prostrate, all ranks pressed on upon another in a single wine press of God's wrath, like beasts, not like human beings. So they're using this kind of language because that people had never seen anything this horrible, ever. So the military was weakened. Here come Germanic tribes invading, and then Islamic armies coming in and conquering a lot of that area that used to be the Byzantine Empire. So it's marked as the end of classical antiquity and the beginning of the Middle Ages or the Dark Ages. All right, so that's all I have to say about that very early plague. Let's spend lots more time on this one because this is what we think when we hear the Black Death or the Black Plague. And I remember Peter and I were talking about this. This was years and years ago. We were wondering where it came from because it's so Eurocentric. They're always talking about how France and Germany and England were affected. And we had a strong notion that it came from the Far East, and it turns out we were right. So those are green areas are areas where the plague was breaking out, but before it had made it to Europe. Now, this is a story I learned in Florence, how the plague first reached Europe. And I was showing this slide to my husband last night. He goes, "Oh, I already know that. I saw a TV show about it." Well, hopefully this will be a big surprise to some of you. The Mongol Khan, his name was Jani Beg. He was laying siege to this city right here, which is now known as Fedosia, but on other maps, old maps, you'll see it called Kaffa. And the Genoese Italians were in charge of those ports, and the Khan wanted those ports back for his gang. Well, his troops were dying, and he decided, let's fling the stinking, rotten, sick corpses over the city walls, ha, 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 and the disease spread to the defenders, the Genoese, and they freaked and left the city. And, they went to Italy and Sicily. So everybody that was in contact with these infected soldiers then became contagious. I don't know if that's plague bodies or excreta or whatever. I just found you a good picture of a catapult laying siege to some poor town. And I couldn't get a good map of this, but basically we're talking about Kaffa is here and how it's going to spread to Europe now. And I never knew this whole district about the Golden Horde Khanate, but shows really good on this map. If you look at this dotted line, this is like a dotted line that you do not go here if you're Christian. This is prohibited. Christians can hang out here, but you do not go past this line. So while I was preparing this, I was really learning a lot. So there's data for many, many of the cities where the plague hit. And so you'll see that once, so the green is the very earliest before it really hit Europe hard, the dark green and the light green. But when we get to 1348, 1349, it's spreading very, very, very quickly by boat and by land. And I couldn't believe this statistic. You know, you hear, oh, 30% of Europe died, or 50%, or oh, maybe it was even 60%. Well, this part, we do know pretty much for sure that in just 1,000 days, it killed an estimated 23 million people. It gives me the chills just to think of it. Now, how did it spread? The population wasn't so big back then. Well, people had very little immunity because it's been 800 years since the Justinian plague. And most people were peasants and they lived in small villages close to grain fields and thatched roof, wattle and daub walls, which means mud and sticks. This is where rats love to make nests. Oh, hail, yes, yes, yes. And if you lived in the city, you were in a very crowded condition, and there are rats there too, eating all the offal and the blood and stuff from outdoor slaughterhouses. And of course, people dumping their garbage, their food garbage, their feces on the streets. So when you have unsanitary conditions and crowding, those are things that the bacillus really likes. So moving quickly through both rural and urban environments. So I used to have this first, but I wanted to get you excited and I wanted to have a couple quotes for you first. But now here's a little review, something that most of us have learned. There is a bacillus and it causes the Black Plague, and many, many times it was transmitted by an infected flea. And here is a flea's body filled with that bacteria. So when they are biting the rats, this bacteria can get into the rats.
No, it doesn't kill the fleas or the rats?
I don't think so. I mean, think about a malarial infected mosquito.
But that's a bacterial load for that poor little
I know,
flea.
I know. And look, there's probably the person's blood. I just think it's sort of like where the mouth parts and the juices carrying.
Mhm.
Rats live everywhere, so they get sick. And when they die, the fleas hop off. And they go into clothing. The plague reached England in a bunch of folded cloth that a tailor opened, and the fleas bit him. So both plagues that we've been talking about so far, and the third one, it may have also been spread by these marmots, because they get infected as well. And then people using detailed historic data, realizing how fast the outbreaks of plague happened. They're wondering if it was also lice that might have helped spread it. And lice infest humans, head lice, body lice, clothing lice, pubic lice. People have lice, and then it could have been just through this guy. This is after a nice blood meal. And fleas from dogs and cats bite us. So maybe it could be spread that way too. It doesn't have to be a rat. Well, we saw the guy that had the septicemic plague that caught plague from a cat when he was trying to take the dead rodent out of its mouth. And I first read this story. I was reading an old booklet from the 1930s called Rats, Lice, and History. I think it was mostly about typhus. Anyway, some people in the olden days never bathe. They thought it might hurt you. They're not going to waste good water on washing their clothes. So people are smelly and dirty. And I love this story so much. When Thomas Becket, Archbishop of Canterbury, was murdered, they put his body into state. And as it cooled, all the lice start leaving the body. So here's a quote from back then. The vermin boiled over like water in a simmering cauldron, and onlookers burst into alternate weeping and laughter. So parasites know when it's time to leave. I've trapped bats to examine them, and I'll hold the bat in my hand. I'm untangling it from the mist net, and the parasites will start leaving the bat and climbing up my arm. And a tiny little bat, wings and a tiny little body, hundreds and hundreds of parasites just on that little bat. So yeah, the lice that were all over Thomas Becket said, let's go find a new host.
Insects.
So this is how I greeted you today. I dressed up as a plague doctor. I bought my mask in Venice. Venice was hit very hard by the plague. Many of the clothes would have been leather so that they could be wiped off and, more protective, more like a second layer of skin. Again, they think that the plague is caused by miasmas, like breathing foul in air. So they would put all those herbs in the beak so that they would be disinfecting their inhaled air. So pestilential miasma. And then eyepieces made of polished crystal discs. And they sometimes carried wands and scalpels and also things that look like giant, for brewing tea, those things with the hole in it, filled with herbs too. I just think if I saw something like this coming when I was feeling lousy, I would be almost scared to death. So here's a real plague doctor mask on display in a museum. Even scarier, I feel. So people believe that the plague was like darts, poisonous darts coming from up above, maybe devils. So this is a picture of devils shooting darts at people to make them sick and also pouring pestilential pots of icky stuff. This I found very, very interesting, and I apologize for all the text, but there's so many things that I just wanted to make sure I didn't leave out. Naturally, there were religious responses, but it didn't help, and many writers left accounts. Overall, generally, Christians thought the God sent a plague to punish people for sins. Whereas at least the Muslim religious leaders believed God sent the plague as a merciful gift, whisk you away a swift trip to paradise.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks a lot. And of course, I think that many of the people, the Muslim people, did not want a swift trip to paradise. So certainly hoping to avoid it. So the responses overall were similar, more and more praying, more and more worrying about visions and signs, I'll have a couple slides about this for the Christian response.
Especially persecuting the Jews.
Oh,
That
that's-
was very
that's-
effective.
That's my bulleted point that's most important, I think. The Christians persecuted the Jews and the gypsies and anybody with a skin disease. And the Muslims respected Jewish physicians and did not. So sum total overall, a lot of the Christians started doubting the power of the church. And maybe this helped set the stage for the Protestant Reformation. And Islamic cohesion remained. I find that so interesting. So speaking of charms and amulets and so forth, I've got some pictures that are doozies. I found these on that Atlas Obscura newspaper or publication. These are all like X-rated amulets. This is, I think it looks like a flying pig, but it's really a penis. This person is holding what looks like testes and a penis. This looks like lady parts, vulva. And then last night I noticed, is that a penis? So very, very protective. and some of us were wondering, is it because the buboes formed in your groin? Was it something to do with your reproductive organs? Did they often get very, very damaged by the bubonic plague? I don't know. Many people went on pilgrimages and you would get these different badges, these amulets pinned onto you to show that you had traveled to a particular holy destination. I love this picture. This is showing so much. It's a gravedigger has just fallen out. Maybe he's got the pneumonic plague. Maybe one minute he was okay and the next day he was boom. So they're burying the dead. This guy just fell out. Saint Sebastian is one of the plague saints, and he is interceding on the guy's behalf to God, saying, please save his soul, or maybe please make him well. I don't know. And look at this, devils flying across the sky, angels. I think that at least 3 of the priests look kind of sick. Dark clouds show God's anger. So this would be a real Christian one. These are painted or drawn amulets on paper and parchment, and you could carry these around or hang them up on your wall. So both of these show 3 different plague saints. Saint Sebastian is known by, he has arrows piercing him. And so Saint Sebastian, and then Saint Roch and Saint John Nepomuk. Nepomuk is usually lying down like in a cave. So the reason that Sebastian was a plague saint is that people tried to kill him by shooting him with lots of arrows, and he survived. He survived all those arrows. So that seemed miraculous. Later on, he was clubbed to death. But the fact that he could survive all the arrows, and you remember plague was like poison darts, he was the logical choice for a plague saint. And then Saint Roch had survived the disease, and he was a do-gooder. So helping a lot of people and becoming a saint because of his good works. And he's always shown lifting up his tunic. So you could see he's lifting up his tunic here. He's lifting up his tunic here to show where, a big bubo had been maybe lanced and scarred over. And then this saint is a much more recent guy from Prague, and he did lots and lots and lots of good deeds, many, many miracles. So there we have 3 of the 3 most important plague saints that you would pray to and put on amulets. All right, so the people who whipped themselves. The Catholic Church condemned this, but people still felt we must atone, God is punishing us for our sins. So they would wander the countryside whipping themselves and dragging heavy crosses. And if the priests didn't go along with it, they would kill the priests. I think I have that on a different slide. I don't want to jump ahead too much. It's a nice woodcut. So anyone that doesn't join them, in league with the devil. So yeah, here's some of my detailed info. They were attacking Jews, gypsies, anyone with a skin disease. I don't know what is with those strange hats. They have different hats in every, I don't know, there must have been different subcultures of flagellants. So some people, of course, were becoming more and more devout and praying, but so many people just got very, very disillusioned. The plague is killing indiscriminately. It's killing people that I could have sworn were very, very, very good, as well as the lazy ones, as well as the bad ones. So Agnola de Toro was from Siena. That's a small town close to Florence. He basically said a lot of us felt like it was the end of the world. We'll see more quotes from him in a minute. Now, whole poems were written, Danse Macabre of men, Danse Macabre of women, where death tells a person, I'm coming to get you. And the person, it might be a young pregnant mom, it might be an old person, it might be a doctor, it might be a military person. They have a conversation with death and basically say, okay, take me. Wish I could have lived long enough to have my kid, but okay, take me. So big, long poems, beautifully illustrated. And then just standalone artworks showing death, asking people to come dance with them, which is the invitation that you're going to die. And for those of you who've never seen the movie The Seventh Seal, you should, because if you're interested in this time period, you'll see the flagellants and you'll also see the dance of death in the film. I won't give away when or how, but it's eerily beautiful, the cinematography. All right, so ladies in waiting and queens and kings and peasants, everybody is dying, whether you're proud or humble, you're dying, you're dying, you're dying. We don't know why, we really don't know why. It's very discouraging. Just different versions. Death inviting people to leave this earth. So we have a Danse Macabre here, but then we also have a different scene. It's related. It's the Queen of Death, and she has two skeleton helpers. And oh, they're shooting darts and guns with plague pellets. And these are rich people begging to be spared and offering gifts. If only you would spare me. Not going to work. So a little bit more about anti-Semitism. There was an organized plan to get them to confess that they were helping to spread the Black Plague. And they wanted them to confess, yes, we were trying to destroy all of Christianity. So allegedly, the instructions of a rabbi told a Jew of Savoy, see, I give you a little package. It contains a preparation of poison and venom in a narrow leathern bag. This you are to distribute among the wells, the cisterns, and the springs about Venice and other places you go. So here are conspiracy theories. You're going to see so many parallels between our current pandemic and this medieval pandemic and a third one as well. So they're burning the Jews alive. So this went on in Spain, France, Germany, Poland, Lithuania, many, many communities. And the Pope tried to talk some sense into the people, saying, come on, everybody's dying. You can't just say that the Jews are trying to kill the rest of us. The Jews, it's not plausible. I'm not going to read that one out loud to you, but it was a very calm and reasoned explanation for why Jews should not be rounded up and burned alive. And did it do any good? So many, and the iconography with this one, you often see a main rabbi, and you often see someone bringing more wood to the fire. Some of the emperors tried to protect the Jews. Nothing worked. People had it in their head that the Jews were causing the trouble, and that was that. And I used to have this poster on my wall for years. Finally, I gave it to someone who was so depressing. But it's called The Triumph of Death by Peter Bruegel. It's not Hieronymus Bosch. Similar treatment of subject matter. But this is how it felt. Armies of skeletons are coming to get us, and we are trying and trying to push them back to no avail. The dying is everywhere. And you might be having a meal or playing a game, or you're gonna be struck down. So yeah, I've looked at this image so often. Every time I look at it, I see something different, like a bloated, floating corpse, a skeleton horse. Death is just now laying her down.
Dog too.
Oh yes. Look at that. Oh, so eating the dead. Remind me about that later, because we're going to talk about hastily dug mass graves. Now, at least in many Christian communities, the belief was that you should not burn the body. I'm not saying all Christians were against cremation. I don't know that much about it, but a lot of them were. So it's okay to burn the Jews, but when we're dying, no, we have to be buried in consecrated ground, because burning is pagan. And I found this picture on the internet and I realized, look at that, is that somebody's folded hands holding something? I now that I see it on the bigger screen, I'm like, ooh, I found a good one. So in many plague-ridden cities, they dug gigantic mass graves, the plague pits, and dumped them in. Now, eventually, in modern times, these plague pits, some of them have been excavated, and it's obvious that many individuals, they can get the bacteria from them. And everybody seems yep to have been infected with this Yersinus pestis. And it really looks like the plague that infected everybody. It was the plague that came from the Genoese sailors. Here's another great quote. A man wanting to make his will died along with the notary, the priest who heard his confession, and the people summoned to witness his will. And they were all buried together on the following day in a giant pit. Nowadays, the plague pits, of course, are covered over. And I learned from the internet that many are popular picnic spots.
Oh, God!
A little
That's
morbid.
But they don't advertise.
Really?
We often see little paranormal shows and on
We use
TV, and so many of them occur in England. There's a lot of spooky stuff going on in England. Maybe this is why. I just loved these pictures. Carts full of dead to bury. Oh, laying them out pretty shallow. Here's one. Lord have mercy on London. I follow. What follow death? We fly. Fly away. We die. Keep out. I don't know. But this woman, Lindsay Fitzharris, has a very good website about plague pits. So here are some excavated plague pits with The age estimates, many adults seem to be hit more than the children. This I couldn't believe, but I had to put in this quote. Religious leaders consecrated rivers that flowed to the sea, so now you could be buried in a river. Each morning that plague spring, hundreds of rotting corpses would float down the stream like a mysterious new species of sea creature. Avignon's dead would flood out into the open Mediterranean where, under a low gray light of sea dawn, they would gather in communion with the dead of Pisa and Messina, Catania and Marseille, Cyprus and Damascus. I like that. Gray light of a sea dawn.
Great food for the crabs.
Yeah. Now, this is something that I only learned when I went to a Mensa meeting. Someone did a presentation about medieval plague and the bodies that were buried in Saint Innocents Cemetery. So I kind of took my friend's idea and I grew it a little bit. Here was the problem. In 1348, 500 bodies buried each day. You had to be buried in a church cemetery if possible. And, waves and waves of plague are going through Europe, 50,000 bodies in 5 weeks. We're looking just at Paris right now. Another big wave, 1466, 50,000 bodies in 5 weeks again. We're looking at this particular cemetery. And this is the charnel house that goes with the cemetery. There was so much burying that the decomposition bacteria in the soil that would break down corpses and leave them just bones was vigorous. So we were able to bury and then dig up, bury and then dig up quite a bit. And interestingly enough, this might be the very first depiction of the Danse Macabre, 1424. Another drawing of the cemetery. But here was the problem. In 1780, in a home or a store right adjacent to the cemetery, the wall collapsed behind the weight of the mass grave with all the rotten, stinky stuff. And they said, okay, the cemetery is now full. No more. Gotta make cemeteries outside of the city, but this is too much. So their problem was also that there were many hollowed out limestone tunnels under Paris because they're mining the limestone to construct the buildings. So it's quarries, hollow quarries under Paris. And the weight of the city above is boom, boom, boom. Whole city blocks are collapsing into these labyrinthine tunnels. So the workers are making columns to hold up the buildings above, but it doesn't work that as well as it should. So this is a combination of two problems. Corpses are everywhere, quarries are everywhere, cave-ins are everywhere. An inspection said the city is in immense peril, and especially the southern quarters of Paris are really, really in trouble. We have to do something about this. So that's when the idea came to empty the cemeteries that were within the city and rebury the bones in the tunnels, in the catacombs. So now all this have lost any kind of personhood because we're having a pile of femurs, we're having a pile of skulls, we're having a pile of scapulas, we're having a pile of ribs. We're making nice designs. So the bones have ceased to be representing people, and now they are almost decorative elements. So there's where the in sort of orange, that's where a lot of the quarries were underneath. So the architect stabilized all the tunnels, and then they dug up all the church cemeteries every night, kind of secret, and transferred them into the catacombs, what we now call the catacombs.
How did they stabilize the tunnels?
I'll show a picture of something like that in a minute, which I think is how they stabilized it. They were pretty strong looking pillars. So every night, wagon loads of bones and a priest chanting the Office of the Dead prayer. So they did this over many years. I've never been, but some of my students have been. They said, you gotta put that on your list. You gotta go, you gotta go. So as you approach it, you see a sign. Stop. This is the Empire of the Dead. But of course, we don't stop. We go down. Many, many great photographs are taken. So there's one of the stabilization columns. Seems to be blocks of limestone. Plus, they were also mixing up concrete. So here are some from the Holy Innocent Cemetery. So they're grouped by which cemetery they came from, but not by individual, of course. In some places, the ceilings are pretty low. It's just amazing.
Made walls out of the skull.
Walls, skull walls, skull ribbons. There's one of the support columns. So they emptied the cemeteries, most of them. And then Napoleon thought, I want this to be a tourist attraction. This is beautiful. So they're going to have tours. And this cracked me up. He made like a room where all the deformed bones would be shown, you know, scoliosis of the spine and syphilis of the face and hideous healed fractures, things like that. And then also the minerals and crystals and whatever that were found while they were doing the quarrying. And at one point, even a pond with goldfish. Come on down, come on, see this stuff. Someone had been a prisoner in some sort of a fortress, so carved this miniature fortress out of stone. I don't know how big it is. There's no scale in the photo I found of it, but that would be an attraction to see. And now I'm just going to jump ahead. I have to take a few little side trips. Much later, remember, these catacombs are vast. Some are used for growing mushrooms. Why not? It's cool, it's dark, it's moist. And here's the best thing. Here's where I really want to go. The police found a cinema and a restaurant bar. And they had it all guarded. Whoever built these things, there was a tape recording of a barking dog, you know, like get out, get out. And there was telephones and electricity down there. And people are painting all kinds of really good artworks on the walls. So watching movies, I think that sounds so fun. Anyway, let's go back to medieval times now. Oh, Siena. I told you we would hear more from Agnolo da Tura. It was a cruel and horrible thing. I do not know where to begin to tell of the cruelty and pitiless ways. It seemed to almost everyone stupefied by seeing the pain. Victims died almost at once. I think those were the ones that had the pneumonic plague. People would swell up in their armpits and their groins. Father abandoned child, wife, husband, brother, sister. No one could be found to bury the dead. Great pits were dug in Siena and piled deep with the dead. They died by the hundreds day and night. But I, Agnolo da Tura, called the Fat, buried my 5 children with my own hands. He dug his own little pit for his family. He lived through the plague. He eventually got remarried. He became a prosperous merchant.
You just had the right gene.
Yep, maybe he had 2 copies of that Delta 32 gene. Nothing was more senseless, uncommon, and cruel to be buried far from the family vault, one's own church, from the texture of family life and neighborhood life, naked, mutilated by animals, a victim of the elements. Because the dogs and the pigs are digging up the plague pits.
They're
And,
hungry.
and this sounds so much like, you know, what we hear about dying alone in a hospital of COVID-19. But really, it seems that for many reasons, the Black Plague did set the stage for the Italian Renaissance to happen. We already said it set the stage for Protestant Reformation happening. So a big economic class was such a game changer. Many people just thought the world's going to end soon. Incredible hopelessness, but also some writers would be sure to write encouraging poetry. And Petrarch was one of these. This is the time he rediscovered the writings of Cicero. So remember, they're just coming out of the Dark Ages, and people, especially in Italy, are discovering Roman sculpture and Roman writing and going, dang, this is good. Wow. Oh, wow. So many of Petrarch's writings were about the joys of life and the beauties of nature. And Boccaccio, the premise for his famous book, the Decameron, was that rich Florentines got out of the plague-ridden city and went up in the country. It's a town now called Fiesole. And they were bored, so they were telling each other stories. So the Decameron is all the stories that they told to pass the time. And some of them are interesting and hopeful. So people started to look for solace in art and literature and music, and artists started to become more respected. At the time that Leonardo da Vinci was wanting to become an artist, art was not well esteemed. It was considered like a craft, like, I don't know, you can paint a shield for somebody, you can paint a sign, you can paint props for a play, or you could paint somebody's portrait. And Leonardo was born illegitimate to a father who would not marry his mother. He later on married somebody else, a notary, I think his father was. And by the end of Leonardo's life, he was so highly esteemed. He died in the arms of the French king. Towards the end of his life, he was living in France. So think about, in his lifetime, going from an illegitimate son and a sign painter and props for the plays to dying and, you know, cradled in the arms of a king. Wow. So what a time of change. And you couldn't have done that before the plagues. Society would have been so stratified. There would be no upward mobility. But in his talents and the fact that the plague had really destroyed the nobility, he was able to achieve incredible things. So laborers became merchants. Merchants became what used to be the nobility, and you could be a self-made person.
A real human being.
Yeah, you could be a real human being. So the nobility were pretty destroyed by this. And terrible financial difficulties. This was the end of serfdom. The land values were way lower, and laborers left, were not replaced. So you're seeing why there might be famines after this sort of a thing. And many nobles sold their serfs. And I loved learning this little thing, the change in inheritance patterns. Before the Black Plague, if you were a peasant, what you could call your own was so tiny, you only had a little bit of something to leave to your eldest son. But by 1450, now the peasants are becoming prosperous. We're done with serfdom. They would have enough land to leave a piece to each of their children.
Even the daughters.
Even the daughters. Oh my God, scandalous.
That really shows that they had too much land.
Way too much, way too much. Now here is Lorenzo Medici. I love him. He was an example of a kind of a merchant who wanted to have himself surrounded by things from antiquity, and he would have physicians and artists living right in his home. Michelangelo actually lived in Lorenzo's home for a while. Lorenzo was raising his two boys and the two sons of his brother who was murdered. Did
he have a wife?
Did Lorenzo have a wife? Yes.
Okay.
So he's the new elite. He's a self-made man. He was supposedly a very, very good poet. He was just such a wonderful patron of the arts. And he was getting his hands on some of that sculpture from ancient Rome. So when Michelangelo was living at Lorenzo's palace, he would be studying all these fragments of Roman sculpture and deciding he tried to mimic the style. And he was so good that Lorenzo was like, oh my goodness, you know. I think that's when he really adopted him. He realized Michelangelo was so incredibly talented. So these really good artists can now have many rich patrons, and you know, the patrons are competing for the artists. Now they are respected. And this is something that was just in the New Yorker the other day. I don't know if you read this one,
Yeah.
Peter. Yeah. In the 1600s, you could buy a newspaper to learn how many of your neighbors died and where, and causes of death were listed. And it was pairs of older women that would go around to collect the information, and then it would be published. And you could avoid infectious areas by reading these papers. And it also included weird deaths, like scalded in a vat of hot liquid, you know. I just found this to be such a terrifying image. I already said this, DNA extracted from skeletons in the plague pits show that Yersinia pestis did really come just at one time and then spread like wildfire. In the first few years, maybe 200 million people were killed, and then wave after wave after wave of infection cycling through, and then even traveling back eastward. Ay, 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 ay. So now we're ready to talk about the third plague. And this one, I've got lots of pictures for you because they're photographs. Again, 500 years after the medieval Black Plague, so a lot of people have no resistance against it, no acquired immunity or anything like that. A new wave ravaged, the globe. So the bubonic plague reached 6 continents this time. So major cities, and India was hit the worst, this particular plague. So only killed 12 million, and many of them were in India. But this is the first time where they're really being smart about trying to decontaminate places and quarantine. So fumigation and quarantine, important. So here is the guy that they named the bacillus after. Andre Yersin. I know, that's why I put in so many detailed things about him. I knew you would be excited, Peter. Born in Switzerland, appointed to deal with the plague in Yunnan. This is where they think it might have emerged from this time. And he's the one that discovered the blunt rod shaped with little pokey things, bacillus. And I love this quote, so I really put this in for Peter. Working to the end of his life, he was an idealist, and he said the following of medical practice: "I am very happy to treat those who come to me asking for advice, but I wouldn't like to make medicine my profession. What I mean is, I would never ask a patient to pay me for treatment. I consider medicine a calling like the priesthood." So I thought that was pretty nice.
Not a typical Swiss.
Maybe he's a new plague saint,
Well,
Saint Gerson.
It was a different era.
A different era, right?
Yeah, but even then, Swiss like the Franks.
So here I'm just lifting shamelessly from the internet. This was the first pandemic to be photographed and to be bacteriologically understood. So it marked the third plague pandemic apart from previous epidemics. The third plague pandemic has left a pervasive legacy and is often forgotten because this was the beginning of modern epidemiology. It really did not originate with the 1918 influenza. It did not. It started with the third plague pandemic, the fumigation, the quarantine. All right, so originated in Yunnan, China, traveled to Hong Kong, and arrived in British India through trading ships. So here they are pulling out stuff from a Chinese area in Hong Kong. There may have been two waves. One would be the bubonic carried by fleas and rats, and the other pneumonic, but also it's still that bacillus site, Yersinia pestis. But pneumonic, you can get it if someone coughs on you. And that was very prevalent in China. Here's a woman's quarantine wagon. I left out some of the worst pictures, and then I realized, oh, it's on Wikipedia, you know, but I just didn't want anyone to be too full of gloom and doom. Okay, so India hurt the worst. I'm not surprised the British took little action to stop the spread because they wanted to keep the ports open. What does that remind you
Oh,
of?
my goodness.
Can't disturb their global networks. So they said, the British said.
Well, because that's all they had. I mean, they were just a little island.
Right, I know, and then the biggest empire ever.
Yes.
So naturally they're like, oh, it's the local people and their filthy customs and their habits and the nasty living spaces. That's what's happening with the why the plague is spreading. Never mind our ships. Well, it was both, right? Of course, it's always both. So I was reading about this photograph, that it's really a colonialist mentality. Here is an Indian man being made to sit in a disinfecting tub, you know, some kind of chemicals, while the others look on. Meanwhile, they could all have the plague, right? I don't see anyone wearing masks, although we did here, see, masks of the workers. Yep.
Yeah.
Here they're disinfecting a building. So tubs of some kind of a fluid, they can spray on things.
That can't have been effective. Right?
No, I
Yeah,
don't think
it's
so.
not.
It's not aerosolized. Now, some of you know so much about Balto and the serum run for diphtheria. They tried to make a serum that would carry the antibodies for the Black Plague, but it didn't really work. So Dr. Simmons injecting his curative serum, it didn't really work very well at all. It worked great with diphtheria, not so much with Yersinia pestis. I love these old photographs. This is in Liverpool. So remember, the plague is going to 6 continents. they'd figured out that the rats and the fleas were the vector, and they are killing the rats, disinfecting the rats, rounding up the rats. Here's New Orleans. Gotta reduce the rat population. You see all the different kinds of traps they have. Find out where they're nesting, find out where they're hanging out. So inspecting rail cars, buildings, ships, leaving out poisonous bait. Here they are dissecting the rats without wearing gloves or masks. I don't know about all this. Here they are burning down a neighborhood in Honolulu, like Chinatown.
Chinese neighborhood.
Yes, because it, they knew it came from China.
Wear young boys, like a 12-year-old boy, sport jacket.
Yeah, so.
They go.
And this- I hear somebody.
I
voice.
did
don't know,
that.
Are you asking me a question? If not, could you turn off
I
your mic?
got a knee replacement
Oh,
here, and I'm trying
Someone
to
needs to
minimize
mute
my
their mic.
walk, and I've been around in a circle.
Hey, somebody needs to mute their mic, okay? We're all hearing your private conversation. Thank you. So this was a promotion, not a promotional, educational film that was being planned to help educate people about the role of rats in plague transmission. And I just liked the artwork of it very, very much. It's sinister, but sort of beautiful. All right, so 1901, a ship named the Senegal was in the news. It was cruising, and some of the people on the boat had the Black Plague. So they had to, even the future president of France, they had to be isolated in a hospital offshore. It's called Lazaretto, these offshore hospitals. Venice had one also. And it sort of reminded me of the cruise ship, the Diamond Princess, when it was found that many people on that boat ship had COVID-19, and they had to be quarantined for quite a while. So parallels between the third Black Plague and COVID-19, lots of racism and violence against Asians. And this we haven't talked much about, but many, many people, not the rat trappers, but many, many people really did not trust the science, what they were figuring out about the bacillus, what they were figuring out about the rats and the fleas. They just weren't believing it. So then they didn't believe the recommendations to slow down the contagion. And as already referenced, the urge to continue commerce and even propaganda by important people to keep the economy going. So I'm going to show you two pictures of plague propaganda. Napoleon had himself painted on the left. He's touching the bubo of a plague victim, and he's not afraid. Look at me, and he's not afraid. His general behind him is afraid. Oh yeah, but Napoleon's not afraid. And it kind of reminded me of Melania and Donald Trump at a big rally. This is Raymond James Stadium right outside, but the Secret Service, they're afraid. They're wearing masks, right? Oh yeah, oh yeah. Is there a vaccine for the plague? Kind of, yeah. I think soldiers all get it. Because remember, plague is still around, but it doesn't work very long. However, the good news is that antibiotic therapy will keep you alive. So if you've been exposed or if you're already infected, many, many types of antibiotics will kill that bacillus. Now, Trina Proofer, who you all met last month, she is very interested in art and architecture, and she reminded me, that the 1918 pandemic, of course, was ravaging the world then. And some lessons learned from that were the importance of clear running water. And especially in New York City, a city Trina and I both love, there was a social movement to improve the tenements. So bigger and better windows. And many people would sleep outside, so porches outside of windows, and breathe in cool, hopefully good air, and make your kitchens brighter and lighter, and have sun pouring into your kitchens, and have the gleaming surfaces be white so you could wipe off any dirt. Now you can see the dirt if your kitchen has white surfaces. And then also people realized, you know, it's not cool to be spitting everywhere. So they made it into a law, no spitting. And we found some interesting, these are still in the subways in Philadelphia and in New York City, maybe all cities, no spitting, it's against the law, we will fine you. So I liked that very, very much.
Well, isn't that like when men or people are using snuff, then,
Yeah.
then they do the spitting.
You know, I never saw anyone use snuff until I moved to Ohio. And
Chewing tobacco.
Chewing tobacco, right, chewing tobacco, where you put it,
But I think that's why I think, I
Yeah,
think that it's like snuff. I mean, it's,
right, snuff is more powdery, but
oh,
yeah,
yeah.
the chaw, I had never seen that. All I knew is I saw someone sitting in a living room, occasionally spitting brown fluid into an empty soda bottle. And I was like, what is that? And my husband was like, this is chewing tobacco. And I'm like, I think I'm gagging. Oh my God.
It's pretty gross.
It's pretty gross. Spit spreads death. So this is my second to last slide. They've made the organism that caused the disease a relatively big if it killed a lot of people. So 200 million people. This is the worst plague. The medieval bubonic plague killed more people than any other infectious disease so far. Second to it, smallpox. But all the plagues that we've talked about, the plague of Justinian, the medieval plague, and here the third plague, are all represented on this chart. And HIV/AIDS is killing, or has killed an awful lot of people.
Because another viral thing.
So I don't know how accurate that is, but the size of the virus is showing that many, many people died from it, more so than, let's say, the Russian flu. Oh, I had the Hong Kong flu. I was so sick. My mother slept with me. I was a teenager. She thought I was going to die. And I had swollen glands and everything too, and a high fever. I remember thinking, if I die, I die. Because, you know, when you're real feverish, you just feel sort of dreamy. All right. So I just wanted to end on a note of encouragement. In every single epidemic and pandemic, there's many who step up and work long hours at great risk to themselves to help sick and dying. So I don't know which is this person, but someone that eventually was deemed a saint because would be helping the people who are dying. Look, there's a bubo on the near the groin. And of course, during the current pandemic, we read a lot about healthcare workers and burnout and becoming numb and becoming disconsolate. But they keep coming back and they keep working and they keep helping people. And sometimes people get better and go home. All right, so now I am open for questions. Thank you for listening to the Plague Doctor. And I don't know, if you have questions, I might be able to answer them.
Great. I have one comment and then one question. And this is a wonderful quote. Now that I've lived through an actual plague, I totally understand why Italian Renaissance paintings are full of naked, fat people laying on couches. Now, secondly, why do all of these things seem to come from the East? You never hear them coming from North America, from South America, from Scandinavia, no, Africa, yeah, we've got Ebola and that's coming from Africa.
Yeah,
What is it about the,
I don't know.
I don't even know that.
I don't know that that's true.
True.
Because
Yeah.
hantavirus is the American Southwest, I think, or some of the bad
it's never
viruses.
been a global pandemic.
No.
though.
No, I don't know why.
Yeah, I don't, yeah, because I think a lot of stuff actually could be starting like in the Middle East. And then you do this, the Silk Road kind of,
Yeah.
the travel. And then
Yeah, but
like
that's-
China, like the countries that are really highly populated.
Really big.
And rural and poor. And-
Yeah.
And have a lot of poverty, so there's
Right,
a lot of people
right,
close together.
Right.
So,
yeah, but in those days, everybody was poor, come on.
oh, I'm talking about now.
No, I'm talking historically.
But I'm thinking that not only
Yeah,
Ebola, but
I-
ultimately HIV came from Africa because it crossed species. It went from SIV, simian immunodeficiency
Yeah.
virus.
Never
into
from North
humans.
America, South America. or
Yeah, I
Scandinavia.
honestly
Does it have to
don't
do
know.
with
I don't want to
population?
speculate
Yeah,
because
no,
I
it's-
have so few.
I'm just curious.
Yeah.
All right, anyone else? Open up.
I just wondered if it has to do with population density.
Someone's gonna have to turn up their mic or maybe I can turn up my. Try again.
Population density, maybe? Just
Yeah,
not only a
yeah.
lot of people, but
Definitely use
densely, that's much more densely populated than the Americans are.
I mean, you realize how undense the North American population is if you're flying from one coast to the other.
Yeah.
There is just so much land that doesn't have anyone even visiting it, never mind living in it.
Hey, Linda, question about the American West, because you mentioned hantavirus, but I
Isn't
believe
that
that
from the American Southwest? I don't know.
you have plague that comes from the American Southwest too, and Navajo nations and others associated with ground squirrels, and it's not just rats. I
Right.
thought it
Well-
does turn up in curious places.
Right, like the guy that got the septicemic plague from trying to rescue his cat.
Yeah.
His cat had the plague. Where did that come from? I don't know.
Insects.
Insects. Yeah.
Blame it all on insects.
Linda, this is John Lloyd talking.
Hi.
What's
see you.
your, good to see you. What, you've been using the term plague. What's the definition of plague? I could Google it, but
In this talk, it's just Yersinia pestis.
say it again.
Yersinia pestis, the bacillus that causes the Black Death. I'm talking about that and three different pandemics. But the plague is sometimes used as a very loose term. Oh, we had a plague of locusts. People might use it as just something really bad. But the way I'm using it is very specific.
Thank you.
Sure.
Linda, I
And,
might have missed this at the beginning, but is Yersinia pestis responsible only for the bubonic plague, or
All three.
it's responsible for all three? Got it.
And like if you had the bubonic plague and you weren't getting better, it could then turn into septicemic and it could then turn into pneumonic. Or you could just catch pneumonic right away if someone coughed on you. But they're all the
These are all
same bacillus.
manifestations of the same infection.
Yeah,
From the same
Yeah.
infectious agent. Okay.
yeah.
Linda, I thought one of the scariest things you said was that the plague would hit a peak in several places around the world, would die out, and then continue to recycle
Yes.
for a couple of centuries. What are the implications for COVID-19, given that so many people still refuse to get the vaccination?
It makes me very worried. It
It'll be
really,
around.
really does. And I don't know how common it would be if you had the bubonic plague and didn't know it, but apparently it's quite common to have COVID-19 and not know it. So you've got the double whammy of not being vaccinated and being contagious. It makes me very worried. And think
Okay,
about
now I'm
it.
depressed.
If they had had a vaccine back then, do you think most people would have taken it? I do. I don't know what is going on.
Well, the distrust, just,
Distrust of science. Yes.
yes,
Mhm. So yeah, I didn't know how to make this talk not depressing.
So,
Sorry.
so another question is, you know, it appears with the medieval plague, but is there any evidence from archaeological excavations of it, you know, having an effect upon folks historically or prehistorically?
I don't really know. But I do know that you could test for those bacilli.
Yeah.
If you suspected. I mean, a lot of people died from anthrax, didn't they? And that
Mhm.
is still detectable. Just think about all this. There's several diseases going on at once. And then there's also famine.
It's no wonder life expectancy was so short for so
Yes.
long, you know, particularly to get you out of childhood, you know, with all the diseases that affect you then, but also these other pandemics and other, you know, just what smallpox did to Native Americans and Europeans, but to everybody. But
Typhus,
yeah, it's
killed a lot of people too.
I've read
I
that
was,
that the average lifespan of the US has dropped in the last year.
Because
A
of,
year or two because of the pandemic.
yeah.
and because of opioids.
that's a very good,
Opioid crisis has also had an effect on life expectancy.
and suicides, which I'm sure suicides are up.
yes.
Okay,
One
I'm
thing I thought
depressed
was really
again.
interesting was to be able to trace history of empire and sociocultural institutions by means of disease.
Yeah, I learned a
I
lot.
would think that might be the kind of place where you'd look at failures of cultures in other places and look there for signs of.
What might have dealt the crippling blow, right?
Yeah.
Right.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I never realized what brought down serfdom was that land values went so low and people just walked away.
And
Man.
shortage of labor.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
shortage of labor and I'm gonna quick show you different slides that I saved. Sometimes I just save different slides. I took this one out earlier as I didn't know if I was gonna go too long, but we really, really need to get a vaccine for the plague because already it's been used in germ warfare by the Japanese. They literally had this area called Unit 731 where they had all kinds of vats of infectious, noxious, dangerous cultures, and they were breeding infected fleas. And then they would make bombs filled with infected fleas. Isn't that nice? It almost sounds laughable at first. I was like, okay, here comes your flea bomb, you know, and it falls through the sky and the clay bomb explodes and out pop the fleas and they don't have any trouble finding rats or cats or dogs. Oh my God. And I mean, we could all look this up, Unit 731 in Manchuria, but this is lots and lots of cruel experiments. And the word vivisection means dissecting people while they're still alive. So, World War II. There's the guy, the Oregon man that took the rodent out of the cat's throat.
Hmm.
And eventually he lost all of that. But, you know, thank God they had antibiotic therapy. They thought he was going to have to be on dialysis for the rest of his life, but actually he's his kidneys are fine now.
No fingers and no toes.
Yeah. Trying to think what else. Oh, I just found so many different pictures of the dead or the dying woman. So
It's a
there's
suckling baby.
the suckling baby. Yeah. And what else did I find I wanted to show you? Who's the artist who did the Scream? Munch?
Munch, yeah.
Munch, yeah.
That's him drawing either himself or somebody is sick with the Spanish influenza. And then Egon Schiele, this is a family that has some sort of terrible infectious disease. I mean, there's so many ways that you could do a presentation like this and drag in all kinds of artwork, which I hope I've done at least enough of, so that it's more of a visual treat than just me blah, blah, blahing at you. All right, those are all my slides, 110 slides. So what time is it? 11:30, not too bad, not too bad.
All right. If there are no more questions, thank you all for attending, and let's turn off the recording.